Okay, works?
Yes, perfect. Just give me a minute.
Sushant, is this okay now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. Just give me a second. I'm sharing it on my PC.
Yeah.
So just start with a common conversation and you can start. I'm hanging up now.
Okay, thanks.
Hello?
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
You can start.
Okay. 1 minute and then we'll start. How many people don't see us? No wonder. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Masterclass live session that we're doing today as part of Living My Promise. I'm Priya Naik, the founder and CEO of Samhita. Just for fun, I thought it would be interesting to have my 8-year-old son Adi interview me today. It'll make sure that I stay honest and keep my answers simple, simplicity is not something that I'm used to. So sit back and enjoy the conversation. If you think of a question that you'd want me to answer, just add it to the comment section below. In the meanwhile, let me introduce you all to Living My Promise. Inspired by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's giving pledge, Living My Promise is a promise intended for ordinary Indians to donate 50% or more of their wealth to charitable causes. The idea itself is very simple. Anyone with a net worth of more than 1 crore can sign up and pledge to donate more than 50% of their wealth for philanthropic causes. Which causes, organizations, or activities you support is entirely your choice. The giving can happen either during your lifetime or as part of your will. So far, 42 Indians have taken the pledge. Read about why they decided to sign up and other information on the Living My Promise website. Adi, should we begin?
Hi, I am Adi and I'm going to ask my mom some tough questions and I hope that you will too. Mom, what do you do? Why do you do what you do?
Adi, my team and I at Samhita help lakhs of people in India live better, happier, and healthier lives. We do this because we believe that helping those that are not as lucky as us is really what is the most important thing for us. We do this with the help of many others, companies, governments, NGOs, bringing us all together to solve some of the most difficult problems that our country faces today.
You have been very busy the last month. What are you up to?
As you know that because of COVID, the entire country is under a lockdown. While that means that you have a long vacation, for many of our rickshawalas and maids and drivers and security guards, these are people who rely on work every day. During COVID, this is an extremely hard and challenging time because they can't go out and work, and therefore they and their families don't have money to buy food and medicines, and therefore we have to help them. That's why Samhita and a few other organizations have put together a plan to do 3 things. We send money directly to workers who have been affected by the lockdown and who have either lost their jobs or livelihoods. We ensure that they have enough money to survive the crisis until they're able to find the next source of income. After the lockdown, we will, as much as possible, try and help them find new jobs by also giving them new skills. We're also helping them get money that the government has promised them. Our plan is called the India Workers Alliance, and anyone can contribute to it.
Isn't the government helping?
Yes, of course. I think the government is doing a lot and it's done a remarkable job. In fact, the government has offered money and food to poor people, but sometimes the poor don't know how to fill out these forms that are required to get help from the government. And so we're helping a lot of these people fill out the forms and open bank accounts so that they can get all of the money and the support that the government has promised them.
Who is taking care of the doctors and nurses and the policemen who are protecting us? Can you help protect them?
I'm glad you're thinking about them. They are our protectors, they are our avengers, and we need to look after them since they are looking after us. They're working very hard to protect us, knowing that they are at risk of being infected. Even more than us, they need masks, they need protective clothing and soaps and money to buy all of this and more. We're working with a lot of partner organizations to do three things. We're sending them soaps and protective gear so that they can stay safe while they do their work. We're training them to protect themselves and also to look after other people who need their help. We're putting together a welfare fund to ensure that collectively we're able to look after their welfare and their families. For example, if they get sick, we will pay for their doctor's expenses. We will also provide scholarships for their children. Making sure that our protectors are protected and cared for is super important. Our plan is called the India Protectors Alliance, and anyone can contribute to it. And I see you nodding your head, and I hope you think it's a good idea, right?
Yeah. How did you come up with these ideas?
Adi, my team and I spoke to lots of experts from across India, such as Dr. Nachiket Moore, the Gates Foundation, and UNICEF. And we asked them simple questions. We asked them what would help people the most, and how do we make sure that every rupee that we have really helps those most in need. So everything that I just told you was recommended by these experts. We've also received a lot of help from government to help us come up with new ideas to help people. But we can only do this with the support of donors and companies, and most importantly, our fantastic partners such as Supermoney and Hakdarshak, who are helping us to reach out to our workers and our protectors to help them every day. Thanks to them, we've now reached out to 25,000 people in the last 2 weeks. And with them and many more others, we plan to help another million people.
How can you help them during the lockdown?
That's a very good question. So as you know that because movement is restricted, what we've attempted to do is work with partners that have digital access. So Supermoney, for example, has a database of 3.5 lakh migrant workers from across the country. Their database has details in terms of who these people are, what's the crisis that they're facing, and they have the ability to send money within an hour. So in the last few weeks, we've managed to reach out to 25,000 such people within a matter of hours, and we've transferred money. Right after the lockdown ends, partners such as Hakdarshak and many others will start reaching out to people to give them access to government schemes, training, and all of the other support that I talked about.
That's a lot. Can I give you my pocket money so that you can help more people?
Thank you, Adi. Although technically that money is coming from me, but yes, both of us and everyone else can support India's workers and India's protectors because every rupee counts. They need our help today, and we need to do everything that we can. For all of those who are watching, we welcome personal donations. But more importantly, if the organization that you work for has workers or protectors that need to be supported, please reach out to us. If the companies that you're associated with want to join the India Workers Alliance or the India Protectors Alliance, please reach out to me on Facebook or at priya@samhita.org. Adi, thanks a lot for your time. You've been very helpful.
Thank you, Mom. I now know a lot about what you do. Over to you, Dad.
Thanks, Adi. So for the rest of the conversation, my husband Prem will ask me tougher questions, I hope.
Hi everyone, hi Priya. Yes, the first question is, what does strategic philanthropy mean in times like today? what sort of realignment will we need from stakeholders such as companies, philanthropists, or nonprofits that are involved?
So we're seeing really two things, right? And they're slightly contradictory, but both necessary. It means that Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar needs to come together more than ever before. It's really important that each of us really uses our money and the limited resources that we have in these very trying times to do the best that we can. It's not just money, it's about using the expertise, the networks, the reach that each of us have. So I guess the one point really is to be able to maximize what each of us can do individually in domains that we understand the best. But it also means that the roles of philanthropy and private sector and government are all a bit mixed up right now. And it's really important for philanthropy to help the government out as much as possible, particularly in three ways. One, that given all of the complexity that the government is doing right now, it is taking a little longer for them to support a bunch of people that need our help. So in that timing mismatch, the work that philanthropy and social organizations have done so far has been incredible, and we will continue to have to do it. The second is also about reaching out to people that the government is not able to reach as effectively, and to extend our support to those individuals here and now. The third is also to be as catalytic as possible. What's been interesting really is how we've seen corporates respond in these trying times, knowing fully well that resources are scarce. And I'll give you two examples. We're working with one of India's largest infrastructure private equity fund, who started talking about the needs of construction workers. As you know, that India has about 50 million construction workers, a lot of whom have been very severely affected because of the lockdown. What we are doing with this private equity fund is putting together a pooled funding mechanism where they, along with the real estate firms that they work with, are able to set aside a little bit of money to ensure that every construction worker on every site gets access to BOCW cards. These are cards that ensure that construction workers get access to all of the government schemes that have been announced for their welfare. Unfortunately, only 25% of workers or less have these BOCW cards that entitle them to these schemes. What we want to ensure with Haq Darshak's help and with this private equity fund in the next few months is to ensure that we reach out to every single construction worker who has access, who should have access to these government schemes, and ensure that they get the money that they need. The math is very simple. For 500 rupees that you can spend to ensure that every worker gets this card, anywhere between 50,000 to 75,000 rupees of government benefits get unlocked for them. And so for a small contribution that the private sector or philanthropists are able to make, we're seeing a lot of benefit actually going to the end user. The second example that again, early days, but we're co-creating it, is coming from an industrial house. And they understand that both they as well as other industries are going to face a slowdown, which means there is the possibility that many thousands of workers in several industries might have to get laid off. And so knowing that they have to prepare for this crisis, they're looking to partner with other industries that are likely to recruit these workers. And therefore, we're putting together a collaborative fund which ensures that collectively we're able to retrain, rescale, and re-employ thousands of people who are going to be out of jobs because of a slowdown in some industries, but where other jobs will get created in other industries, and ensure that we facilitate that transition. It's also been interesting to see how quickly the government is responding. So a couple of days ago, we spoke to a very senior official in the Maharashtra government, and he was able to come up with lots of solutions about how to set out a security fund meant for sanitation workers and their families. So these are really unprecedented times, and we're seeing a lot of stakeholders actually really pushing the boundaries and being extremely creative in terms of what they can do individually, but what they can do as a collective.
Thank you, Priya. And for those who are listening in, I think please feel free to post your questions in the comment section that appears on the page. We have a question from Venkat Krishnan. How do you think CSR funding to NGOs will be affected in the post-COVID scenario?
That's a good question. So I know that FSG is currently doing a study to talk to lots of CSR leaders and NGOs to ask them what the impact is going to be. These are early days, it's hard to tell, budgets are still being finalized. But a few things are happening. One is that a lot of funds have already been allocated to COVID, which means two things. One is that given that their profits will be impacted, just the pool of money that's available for CSR is going to shrink. Now, because of COVID, we're seeing really two kinds of responses. We're seeing companies who are reallocating their CSR money to respond to the crisis. And it's only right, a lot of their own stakeholders, whether it's their workers, whether it's their communities, whether it's their partners, are getting severely affected. And so business is really stepping up to provide support to those impacted. We've also seen companies who have conserved quite a lot of their CSR money to ensure that their projects, which have been planned well in advance, don't get affected. So, for example, if you don't invest in rainwater harvesting, if you don't invest in ensuring that farmers are able to do what they need to do once the rains come, otherwise you'll end up affecting their livelihoods as well. So it's absolutely important to preserve money for projects that are needed to ensure livelihood, but also education and healthcare and a whole bunch of other services reach those that need it the most, even post-COVID.
Got it. In a post-COVID scenario, do you think the nature of social problems have changed, or will they be similar to the challenges we faced pre-COVID, but at a different magnitude and scale?
Yeah, so I think we are seeing a lot of changes, right? For example, some problems have become more urgent than ever. Safety, for example, has become paramount. Not just our safety, but the safety of those that protect us. There are a whole bunch of new challenges that we hadn't really anticipated at scale. So while we as a country have been worried about what happens to our migrant workers, that problem has become even more stark as we're seeing hundreds of millions of people whose livelihoods have been affected. And so we're seeing a lot of work being done right now to figure out how do you create a social protection net, not just during the crisis, but even after, to ensure that our poor don't get as affected as they have been in this current situation. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to now understand seriously as a country, how our health system needs our help, right? I think we lean a lot on our government to do their bit, but private sector and philanthropy really needs to step up because this is a situation that's affecting all of us.
We have a question from Satish. Thank you, Satish. What are your plans to create employment opportunities for the migrant workers who return to their native place after lockdown is lifted?
So we're doing several things. The first is, and it's work in progress, because I don't think we or industries or the nonprofits and other partners that we work with fully understand the extent of COVID's impact on lives and livelihoods. We are working very closely with government, with a lot of partners and industries to actually come up with industry-specific, skill-specific solutions. I gave you an example of the construction industry really kind of coming together to ensure that construction workers have access to government schemes that have been provided. We're also beginning to work with large SHG groups who traditionally supply to large fashion brands whose livelihoods have been affected. So we're figuring out mechanisms to provide working capital to them to ensure that they're able to start manufacturing protective gear, which then helps our protectors. We're also talking to lots of other players to figure out both a financing facility as well as a mechanism to support new as well as old micro entrepreneurs to regain their livelihoods. The old rules don't apply anymore. We no longer have 6 months and 8 months to be able to do this. So really stitching together collaborative efforts between industry, government, nonprofits, as well as financial institutions, because you need both the money to help them sustain and generate these new livelihood opportunities, but you also need skills and market linkages, and all of it has to come together at scale.
Thank you. Again, just to reiterate, I think for those listening in, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comment section. We'll move on to a question from Sandeep Narwani. Thanks, Sandeep. How can NGOs bring in more transparency during COVID relief operations?
That's a great question. So, I mean, at least what we've attempted to do is actually work with partners such as Super Money that have platforms where any money that is donated to a worker is completely transparent to the donor who's funding it. So we have dashboards to show that every rupee that is allocated to a worker, 100% actually goes to the ground. And so we've had to change our models of working and rely a lot on NGOs and other organizations that have digital platforms where you're able to deliver things at scale quickly without human contact, but also in a highly transparent manner. We're using this opportunity to also build the backbone of NGOs very quickly, as you can imagine, to ensure that their work is not just transparent, but it's really as efficient as possible, because you want as much money as possible to reach the ground. Yeah, but it is a challenge.
We have a question from Supreet Dhiman. Thank you again, Supreet. Are there any specific causes within civil society which would get affected more than others? I'm worried about support for education and also sexual abuse within families.
So let me take the second one and then go to the first one. I think all of us have heard a lot of reports of violence against women, even right now, and it's happening because of a lot of reasons, right? Families are facing a tremendous amount of hardship. There is a lot of frustration, anger, anxiety, and women sometimes bear the brunt of it. Everyone is, sort of holed up together in very confined spaces, and that is, I mean, we're seeing the impact of that. What we're attempting to do is actually also invest in helplines and hotlines that are available for all kinds of people, right? Women who are facing any kind of abuse, to be able to call up and immediately report a complaint. It's ensure that all of those helplines and hotlines are connected to the police. Even in a lot of our training and capacity building that we're doing for individuals and healthcare workers, we're emphasizing just the need to be more vigilant for signs of abuse and be able to respond to it more effectively. But the problem is highly complex. The second one is in terms of education, and it's not just education, but it's environment, it's it's sanitation, it's a whole bunch of other causes which will see much fewer resources being allocated. So there's really two things that we're doing right now. One is working with all of our corporate clients and other funders to also ensure that funding for critical issues does not get cut, and figuring out a way also to bring in other pools of money. But the second is also using digital education, whether it's for training and capacity building or for teaching children, as mechanisms to reach out to more people during the lockdown. As you can imagine, none of it is easy, but we're seeing behavior change happen faster than ever.
We have a question from Arun Kumar. Arun asks, and it's an interesting question, over 7,000 crores of CSR funds have gone to PM CARES. This is about 30% of CSR support to NGOs last year. Do you think many NGOs will be forced to close down?
It's something we're all worried about as a sector. We've seen lots of industry reports that talk about how mining and pharma and telecom and retail and tourism are going to get affected. We have no such report which talks about how NGOs are going to get affected. And if NGOs get affected, then all of the millions of people that we serve will also get affected. And at a time when we can't afford to ignore them at all. And if anything, they need more support than ever. So yes, it's extremely worrisome to see, just to manage with very limited resources that have been left over. But we're really doing our best and also working with other intermediary organizations and other specialists to have lots of conversations with donors to say, make sure that you don't cut back your funding to your partners who worked with you over the last few years, who do extremely critical work on the ground. So while funding might reduce, please make sure that the sustenance or the sustainability of organizations and the projects that they are working on doesn't get severely impacted. Yes, the scale will reduce and it will reduce significantly, but how do we still ensure that money is made available and we're still reaching out to as many people as we can together?
Ujjwal Thakkar has the next question, and I guess some overlap with the previous one, but maybe some nuances. What is the financial impact you expect on the NGO sector in the post-COVID world, and the consequent impact on jobs in the sector, as well as the impact on beneficiaries of all of the NGO?
Yeah, Ujjwal, like I said, I think all of us are very, very worried, right? So we're, I think, based on just rough numbers that a bunch of other organizations are collating right now, and we're doing our best to share them across organizations so we have a better estimate. We think that 30 to 50% of money that was allocated to NGOs has now been moved to COVID response, which means that normal projects will see a significant effect. We're already seeing layoffs within the nonprofit sector, and those will only increase. My worry is also really for the field workers, who in any case, I mean, you know NGO budgets, right? We don't pay our people very well at all. We expect a lot of people to do volunteering work. And all of those people who really work on not very much to do very, very important things are going to get affected. And so I think it requires a lot of conversation between funders, between their NGO partners and the staff to figure out how do we ensure that people don't get affected, whether it means that they go part-time, whether it means that we're seeing some salary cuts. Let's make sure that salary cuts are not being passed down to people who just can't afford them. But these are, just like companies are having those conversations with their employees, it's important that we have all of those conversations with our donors, and not just individually, but also as a collective. I think, we don't do a very good job of coming together as an industry. So the more we can do in terms of reaching out to media and CEOs, because a lot of these budgets are now sitting in the CEO's office. So to have conversations at the very top with senior leadership to say, while you're protecting your workforce and your employees and your contract workers, the NGOs that you partner with deliver very critical services and therefore need to be given the same amount of care and concern as you're exhibiting for your immediate stakeholders.
The next question, thank you. Even with limited resources, how can a corporate create maximum impact in such a time?
Thanks, Shavina. So, I talked about some of these examples, and let me go back to the first example that I used about the private equity fund looking after construction workers. Now, the reality is that the entire infrastructure industry is going to be affected, particularly the housing sector. And so what we're encouraging companies to do is really a few things. One, to be very creative about how to use their very limited resources. So in this case, 250 rupees that a fund is able to put together, matched with 250 rupees that every real estate company is able to allocate for its construction workers. The combination of the 500 rupees is able to unlock somewhere between 50 to 75,000 rupees of support from the government. This is also a time when the government is putting out a lot of schemes for the poor. And let's make sure that we are leveraging all of those resources as smartly as we can. Something else that we're doing, for example, is instead of asking companies to buy PPEs and just donate it, we're requesting them to put that money in a working capital fund. Now, the issue with PPEs is not that there is no money to buy PPEs, it's just that supply is very severely affected because the government pays on delivery, but SFGs or other people who manufacture PPEs actually need money to invest in raw material and in their own labor to be able to manufacture this. So instead of just buying PPEs makes sense to create a working capital fund. And so the same money actually unlocks 10, 15, 20 times the quantum of PPEs that one can deliver. We're also recommending our companies, while they're currently doing direct cash transfers to help their workers, we're recommending that maybe we provide zero interest loans over an 18-month period and ensure that these employees who might get laid off are getting retrained and re-employed, so that in 6 months they have the resources available to survive, but they're also able to get a new job. And once they have a job, they can repay this money. This money goes back into a revolving fund and can help a lot more people. Right, this time more than any other time, we just need to be as creative with our resources as possible. And a lot of this is being made possible really also because of large-scale collaborations that we're seeing within industries, but also with government and other financial institutions.
Vineet Saraiwala is the next question. Does Super Money have marginalized groups in mind, like people with disabilities or people with chronic diseases, and how can we support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done with Super Money and with a lot of our donors is that while Super Money has a database of 3.5 lakh people, we've prioritized really the most marginalized. So women, people working, people earning less than 12,500 rupees a month, people with disabilities, individuals that, for example, are sanitation workers or cleaners. So people who are marginalized, both economically as well as people who are at risk. So we're actually ensuring that we are prioritizing their welfare right now. So IDFC Bank, for example, which is one of our donors, has chosen to support women and those that are very severely impacted. Right now, most money that we collect is all going to the ground. So write to us, and happy to work with you to find pools of people that are the most marginalized and can really benefit from your support.
Venkat Krishnan comes back with a question. How do you think philanthropic foundations should respond to this crisis? Have you heard any of them thinking of eating into their own corpus to serve the immediate need?
So I think, like I said, that it's a difficult time even for philanthropy, because how do you allocate resources? Do you allocate resources to your existing partners? Do you quickly step in where the government can't, knowing fully well that the need is extremely large and no amount of money can help? So, we're recommending that philanthropic foundations really do a few things. One is preserve their portfolio as much as possible. The programs that they had designed were designed very thoughtfully, but with some tweaks, we really still need to ensure that we protect what was being done. But with the money that they have allocated to COVID, it means really reaching reaching people that the government can't reach, but more importantly, being as catalytic as possible. So, for example, we're talking to several philanthropic organizations to put together this zero interest facility to help micro entrepreneurs and workers who've lost their jobs just ensure that they come back. Now, again, if the foundation chose to do this by itself, its scale would be limited. But their money is really coming almost as guarantee capital that helps us unlock more money from CSR. So, a short answer to your question is: should they eat into their corpus? Yeah, maybe. I mean, this is an unprecedented time, and we need all the resources that we can get. But I think also to just be smarter about how to create some of these leverage opportunities wherever possible, and really work in close coordination with the government and unlock, whatever resources the government is putting out right now.
So again, thank you for all these questions, and for those of you listening in, and if others have questions, please continue to post them in the comment section. Do we have models in place, Priya, to tackle some of the challenges that COVID has thrown up? For example, how are we going to ensure access to education to children from low-income groups who might not have access to online schooling, digital devices, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's we see our children, being able to continue their education even in this lockdown, and it's incredibly difficult to think of children who are, just have to don't have the opportunity to do that. Right? They are, as it is, they're left behind, and we're going to leave them further behind. And so this time more than ever, I think, the fact that while we have been inconvenienced, the poor have really had their lives and their livelihoods disrupted. So just, I think we will have to work very closely with state government. A lot of these children go to government schools, and donors and NGOs, to come up with, two kinds of ideas. One is, how do you ensure this digital access in a post-COVID world? And how do we do it very, very quickly? Because for the first time, we're seeing people open to changing behaviors and changing norms. I mean, schools who just hadn't considered digital learning are very quickly getting up to speed. And therefore, a lot more concerted and collaborative effort needs to be invested in ensuring that our education infrastructure is able to respond fairly quickly. But we also need to figure out what happens to those who are just not going to have that digital access. And therefore, I think going back, if we cut those critical funds here and now, you're going to see a longer term impact, which we can't afford.
Thank you. We have a second question in from Arun Kumar. And he says, look, good news, a lot of first-time donors in the space of relief work. But the not so good news is that there's a fair degree of insensitive, unethical, personal identification related questions being thrown at NGOs. And so in this situation, how do you ensure that relief continues without compromising the dignity and the privacy of the resource poor?
So let me just divide that into those two parts, right? I think let's focus on the good news first. And I'll give you an example. We work very closely with the Gates Foundation and their portfolio of organizations that are very heavily invested in ensuring high quality sanitation infrastructure for the country. And we've really struggled to draw attention to, for example, sanitation workers. And in the last 2 weeks, we've had 8 donors, who hadn't considered sanitation workers as a vulnerable population, really stepping up to support sanitation workers and their families. So the good news is that we're seeing donors being more generous, more creative and innovative, and also willing to reach out to or support pools of people that they hadn't really thought about in the past. So that's really good news, right? And we need to capitalize on the momentum, the interest, and really bring them in not just as one-time emotional donors, but to create a deeper conversation as to why these issues are important and will remain even more important going forward. I completely agree with you on the bad news. In terms of really, because we are all forced to transact digitally, because we are forced to rely on organizations that have greater amount of digital access. And, I'm very cognizant of that as well. But I don't have a simple answer, because today, the government is formulating a lot of these policies. And I know that the justification right now is that this is what's needed to be able to reach out to as many people as possible, although we are compromising their personal information and safety. It's not an answer really that I have, but it needs to be just a collaborative effort and get multiple experts and perspectives to say that while this is an unusual situation, it can't come at the risk of people's safety and privacy. And also what happens post the lockdown, right? Some of these things that we take for granted, for example, even the 25,000 people that we reached out to, we have taken a lot of their phone numbers to be able to call them and ask them if this money was helpful, what else they need. I worry that I'm using that data to ensure that I'm able to be more effective, but how do I ensure post-COVID that we are protecting that information and not using it for any other purpose? So I'm just saying I think it's an individual responsibility for all of us as organizations, but it's also a collective responsibility.
Thanks, Arun. Sandeep has come back with another question. How can philanthropic organizations be a part of state level policy response plans?
So, we are a part of a couple of organizations who are organizing task forces. And these are task forces that are comprised of experts from all walks of life. So there are economists, there are healthcare experts, there are judges, there are sort of big data experts coming together. And I think the more collaborative task forces that we are able to create and the more perspectives that we are able to bring into them, the better our recommendations will be to the state government. So really just two suggestions. One is, wherever possible, let's create these communities of conversation. Even if we were to do it within the philanthropic ecosystem, that alone is actually very powerful. And the second is that there are a lot of these task forces that Niti Aayog has put together, or IDFC Institute has put together, a whole bunch of others have put together. And let's make sure that we are a part of them and that we are also talking to them proactively about our NGOs, the people that we serve, the social enterprises that we work with, because very often these perspectives get lost.
Thanks, Sandeep. Sushant has returned, and again, for those that would like to post questions, please add them to the comment section. So Sushant asks, do you think the government should give any relief package or any tax breaks on donations to the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. This time more than any other time, I think any help that we can get from a tax perspective would be incredibly helpful. And again, I think these are conversations that we need to have as individual influencers, but we also need to have as collectives with the government.
Shabina asks, we understand you spoke about implementing innovative models in such times to tactfully combat the virus. How much traction have you witnessed from companies across industries and sectors in India to partake in this?
So it's been a very interesting 3 weeks. We've been talking about collaboration forever, and that's a great word. Lots of people nod their heads and say it's a good thing to do. But in the last 3 weeks, we have seen an incredible amount of collaboration. And I'll give you a couple of examples, from like on the part of companies, government, as well as just us and our partners. So a few weeks ago, I was talking to a senior official in the Maharashtra government, and he really highlighted the need to create a protection fund for sanitation workers and their families. Within a few hours, we were able to get a large technology company to be interested. We were able to very quickly do a call between their board members, the senior official, as well as an insurance expert. And within a day, there was a model that we had put together to actually provide not just immediate relief, but potentially long-time support to sanitation workers and their families in Maharashtra. This is unprecedented, right? To see a lot of creative ideas and innovation coming from the government, to see a very quick, open response from private sector, where instead of poking many holes and playing the devil's advocate, which is what we normally do, there was a lot of problem solving even on that conversation. And then to actually have experts give a lot of their time to help figure out these solutions in a way that they make sense for the beneficiary pools that we are trying to help, make sense for industry, and there are adequate safeguards, and the governance structure is thought about. We're thinking about how to leverage government resources and infrastructure and schemes. The ability for these diverse set of people with very different perspectives to come together very quickly to figure out a solution has been really quite phenomenal. We're working with Uber to help a large number of their drivers to get support at a time when they have lost their jobs. Again, we're seeing a lot of collaboration within the logistics industry to come together to look after their own. What's been fascinating actually is the fact that we've got industry leaders and corporate CEOs who understand their stakeholders better than anyone else, really being willing to co-create solutions that work with them and leverage all of the influence and the networks that they have. We've never seen this amount of coordinated action and willingness to collaborate. And I'll give just one more example, even with Super Money. I remember a few weeks ago, it was Wednesday at 11 o'clock, and a friend of mine talked to me about Super Money for the first time. At 12 o'clock, I had spoken with Nikhil, who's the CEO of Super Money, and we figured out a solution to ensure that we can do direct cash transfers to these migrant workers who were hit. And Nikhil and his team had been fielding calls from workers who had been stranded, who had lost their jobs, who were afraid that they had driven somebody to the airport and, maybe they were infected. They were worried about their families. And so very quickly, I think over a matter of an hour, we figured out a solution. We were very fortunate. I used to work for the Poverty Action Lab 14 years ago, and Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, who were my bosses back then, have been talking a lot about why direct cash transfers at a time like this is really the most effective mechanism to get money into the hands of those that need it the most. So the combination of expert advice, but also the solution that we were able to put together at 1:30, I spoke to our first client about COVID response, and I proposed a solution that Nikhil had suggested. And by the end of day Thursday, we had a commitment of 1 crore and 10 lakhs. To go from an introduction to a solution, talk to experts such as Educate More to say, does this make sense? Is this the most effective response at this point in time? And then to be able to quickly raise money and transfer it all in very, very short time periods. These are things that we've seen in the last 2 weeks. So it's really been quite phenomenal.
Thank you. We have a next question from Bipin Mohanty. Any doubt on unavailability of foodstuff, and if so, are the measures going to help?
Any doubt on the unavailability of foodstuff?
I assume that the question is more to people, supply chains. But that's all the clarity I have. And if so, are the measures going to help?
I'm not an expert on supply chains for food, but I know that we've had lots of requests from organizations who've been delivering food, and we've been very cognizant of the challenges that they are facing. But yeah, beyond that, I'm really not an expert on.
Ben, I guess if you have a more specific question, please feel free to post that. Vinita has the next question. You mentioned that one of the alliances looks to provide immediate relief to workers. Can you give a glimpse into the impact you've been able to achieve as a collaborative alliance?
Yeah, so we set up the alliance 10 days ago. We've already reached out to 25,000 people who've received money and support. In the next 2 months, we're expecting to reach 1 million people, both on the Protectors Alliance and the Workers Alliance. All of this is really possible because of 3 things. One is the kind of experts that we've got who've advised us in terms of the interventions that are most effective at a time like this. The second is really corporate partners who are not just leveraging their CSR money, but their networks, their reach, really coming up with creative solutions that make sense for their industries at scale. And the 3 partners such as Supermoney and Hakdarshat and many others who really have the ability to deliver these solutions at scale, even in times like this when we're so constrained.
Thank you, Vinita. I guess the next question is from Matthew. What are the top 2 or 3 measures or key actions NGO leadership should take post this immediate shock?
So a couple of things. I think one is to look at their own organizations and their priorities, because resources are going to be scarce. So to figure out not just new ways to fundraise, but really new ways to work in a post-COVID world. Just even how we execute programs on the ground will change with social distancing. We'll have to take a lot more care in terms of training and building the capacity of NGO workers to be able to just run programs on the ground. That's one. The second is, also to really have very honest conversations with their supporters, their board members, their funders, their partners, to say how are they going to tide over this crisis. And for every there are some organizations who have been able to respond to COVID very well. They've been able to raise a large amount of resources. They've been able to function at scale. A lot of that has happened because they have very strong relationships with the government and funders that they have carefully cultivated and invested in over a long period of time. But for the rest of us who haven't done that, this is really the time to have a lot more honest conversations about survival, about impact. Resources are scarce, and really we have to be as creative internally and externally to do what we can. And like I said earlier, that it's not just a responsibility of every NGO leader, it is our responsibility as intermediaries, as people who work with a large number of donors, to also have those conversations continuously at multiple levels, even within the funder ecosystem.
Thank you. We have a question from Rohan. How should companies who want to support go about identifying the medium and the method to support that is important and also impactful?
Yeah, so companies are in a very challenging situation themselves, right? A large number of them are very busy today figuring out the impact on their own business and their stakeholders. And so, at a time like this, when it's absolutely important to conserve all resources for business continuity and for your own stakeholders, that really should be the first priority of every business as well, just survival and the welfare of those that work for them. But it's important to think about the trade-off between an immediate response and a longer-term response, even as you think about the welfare of your stakeholders. For those that have money left over for CSR, who had allocated that money before, who have those reserves, again, we're encouraging all of our companies to really just follow a portfolio method to say, allocate money for COVID, but even within that, figure out an urgent response and a medium-term response. So it's easy enough to say, let's feed a lot of people right now, let's do lots of direct cash transfers for migrants, but in another 2 weeks, some of them will have jobs, a lot of them will not. And what are we going to do collectively as a country to ensure that they don't slip back into poverty, right? That they get the job. I mean, remember, these are people who had a job. They didn't need our help before this, but they need our help now. And so how can industries and businesses be very creative about creating some of these job opportunities, not just for their workers, but for other stakeholders within the system. The second also is just lean a lot on collaboration. Today, more than ever, people are willing to pool together resources. I mean, we've had in the last few weeks, many companies call us to say our truck drivers are stranded, our security guards don't have money, the construction workers that we work with may not be able to come back. What do we do? This shared value more than ever is becoming important, because it is business responsibility. It's also the responsibility of us, to kind of step up. So to create these solutions where we are looking after stakeholders of business, but we are also leveraging philanthropic money and other kinds of capital is really what's going to be so important. And, I think just to give you a personal example, my husband runs a private equity fund. He's been doing healthcare investing for over a decade. And he and I had never really had a conversation about India's healthcare ecosystem. And last week, the two of us were talking to Nachiket more, and we realized that all these perspectives are important. You need to think about public health, you need to think about commercial capital, you need to think about philanthropic capital. The boundaries of what was strictly my domain and what was his are now being blurred. And the more we break those boundaries and have conversations with other people who can potentially help co-create solutions with us is becoming more important than ever. But also, people are so willing and so generous with their time. We've had a whole bunch of volunteers, who've been working 8-10 hours a day every day. They don't need to do this. But they're all stepping up, and all of the help is very welcome.
We have a next question from Lata Rele. Once funding is available, how do you ensure people living in the slums, migrant workers, get the immediate help they need? Food supplies, groceries, COVID tests?
Yeah, so actually, right after this at 2:00, I have a call. So IDFC Institute has put together a community of people who are all thinking about this issue, which is how do you support slum communities? Already in Bombay, we're seeing hotspots emerging in slum communities because of crowding and various other reasons. And it's not just the impact of COVID, it's their lives and livelihoods have been affected. post-lockdown, there will be other infections and other diseases that in any case they battle with on a day-to-day basis, which is going to impact them more than ever. And so what we are looking to do is really a collaborative response where communities, funders, corporates, government all come together. And instead of offering one service at a time, we're also figuring out a mechanism to offer this integrated support, whether it means money, whether it's medicine, whether it's food supplies. But resources are really scarce right now. And the more collaboration we stitch together, even in terms of execution, the better. Just efforts underway. And it's really a question of ensuring that we are very, very efficient in terms of how we use our own resources and our manpower to reach out to communities.
Thank you for the question. We'll go back to Bipin, I think, who's provided some clarification on his question. He is trying to help auto drivers in Bhubaneswar who have no livelihood. And his question is, can you help them with rations or cash transfers?
Yeah, so cash transfers, absolutely yes. Just reach out to us, talk to us and talk to Super Money. Let's figure out a way how we can quickly get them on the database. It's not that complicated. It's just about ensuring that we're able to identify all of them, that there is an organization that can verify the credibility of each of these drivers, and then we then have the ability to reach out to them as long as they have a bank account. That can happen while the lockdown is still on. That's a good way for us to respond. Otherwise, we can respond through organizations that are local and are working with the auto rickshaw drivers more formally.
Thank you, Bipin.
Sorry, just even in terms of food supply, we know that there are lots of organizations that have now created a fairly robust mechanism to donate food at scale. So happy to introduce you to all of them as well. But I think the challenge right now is not so much the number of people that we can reach, but just the amount of resources that we have available to reach them. There is a very significant, demand supply issue right now, and really whatever help we can get from donors and corporates and individuals would be great.
Thank you, Bipin. Hope that clarifies your question. We have a next question from Sheena. While corporates are looking to create large-scale solutions, some resident societies are also pooling in with their limited capacities and supporting sanitation workers, watchmen, gardeners, etc. But this, of course, won't last for long. Is there a platform where they can network and bridge the distance between corporate funds and workers?
Yeah, so please write to us. That's exactly what we're doing. We're finding pools of communities that have already responded to these workers, but know that you need a longer term mechanism and a more sustainable mechanism to continue to provide support. Please reach out to us, because in parallel, we're also reaching out to the government to say, how do we create this social protection mechanism to look after workers and their families? Look, I mean, we're all worried. We're asking, our sanitation workers to back to work, and unless they do, there can't be. We can't go back to work unless they are on the streets. And if they are going to risk their lives at a time like this, then we need to have their back. So even before the lockdown ends, we're actively talking to state governments about how to put together this security fund, which is able to support them in case they fall sick, if their families need support in terms of scholarships, etc. So really creating a mechanism to support them here and now, but also a mechanism to ensure that we are leveraging government schemes to offer a longer term, more sustainable, but also a quicker solution.
Yes, perhaps a final question. How can we leverage the current situation as an opportunity at creating much required social change, like affordable medical infrastructure, for example?
That's a good question. Again, I think telemedicine has been around forever, but it's now that we're realizing how important it can be at a time like this. So we're using this opportunity to, again, very proactively work with state governments, with large companies, with philanthropists, with NGOs, because you need these various actors to come together and even deliver a solution like telemedicine, right? You need to obviously train, let's say, your primary care providers, your ASHA workers to even access these services, and then in turn ensure that the people that they serve get that access. So we are really kind of using these few weeks to talk to government agencies, experts from India's leading strategy consulting firms, because they have a kind of a bird's eye view in terms of how the healthcare sector is shaping up and the trends in the future. We're talking to investors, we're talking to pharma companies, we're talking to NGOs, to also co-create solutions where the state obviously has to play the dominant role. But where can we unlock private capital? Where can we unlock philanthropic capital? How much of it is bridge funding? How much of it, are just areas that philanthropy will need to support now and forever? But using these situations to quickly have those conversations, deploy solutions, test it out, and then also continuously respond to it, because what's true today may not be true in a few weeks. So, for example, we were talking to a couple of government agencies, and a lot of their focus right now is on hotspots, particularly in metros. But we know that post-lockdown, the infection will shift very significantly to rural areas as well. Are healthcare workers prepared to respond to the crisis once that happens? And therefore, it's important to use philanthropic capital to build their capacity right now, so that we don't, have to have a disaster in a few weeks or in a few months. So really kind of using money smartly to be as catalytic as possible, as collaborative as possible. And it means a lot more effort for all of us, right? To be able to tweak our model or our way of thinking or how we've allocated our resources earlier to now come up with these new ways, and also to be very open to ideas that other people are giving us. But more than ever, this is the time to do it.
We'll slip in a last question from Mr. Babu. What will be the long-term investment requirement where companies can intervene or, I assume, contribute to?
So there's no easy answer, right? And I think, I hate to say this, but there's obviously a matrix, which is each industry will have to look after its own, because stakeholders across the board are going to get impacted. Your blue collar workers are getting impacted, their families are getting impacted. They don't want to come back to work right now. And what happens 3 months from now? We don't know. And so one is actually for each company to be very proactive in thinking about how this impacts their own stakeholder community, and to allocate resources for that upfront. But second, also use this opportunity to create industry-specific coalitions. Just to give you an example, with Uber and with a lot of logistics companies, we're using direct cash transfers to help workers, because they're used to this form of sort of mobile money transaction. And therefore, it was very easy for us to deploy money and quickly start helping them. In the construction industry, it was a different solution. It was actually leveraging the 38,000 crores that the government has sitting in state cesspools across the country. For textiles and other industries, we are looking at reskilling and re-employment options. So what I'm trying to say is that each industry will have to develop its own solutions, but ideally we should deploy those solutions in close collaboration with other business partners, the government, civil society, and philanthropists, so that we're able to pool together resources to impact as many people as possible, with an eye for what's urgent and important now, but what will become urgent and important a year from now. So very much like we do scenario planning for all of our businesses, it's important to use the absolute same principles, even for the people that we're trying to serve.
Thank you all. Our son was skeptical about whether we would get enough questions to fill up the hour, but it seems like we have run out of time. But we hope you enjoyed this session today. Thank you, Priya, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And before you sign off, please don't forget to like the Living My Promise page, and stay tuned for more such interesting sessions every Saturday. And for any more information, please go to livingmypromise.org. So with that, we'll sign off and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.